Hey, everybody, welcome to the Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's Rick, and today we have Sean Flood. Sean is the managing partner of EFO Ventures, which is an early stage investment and concept incubation firm that backs companies in the mobility, health and wellness, sustainability, and service industries. So we're pretty excited to have him on. Those are pretty hot industries. Plus, Sean is a seasoned entrepreneur and operator. His experience in product development and supply chain management has proven highly beneficial for all of EFO Ventures' portfolio companies. Notably, he was the founder and CEO of Gotcha Mobility, a startup that he scaled from 0 to 120 employees and one of the top 5 mobility companies in the US under his leadership. So, thanks for coming on the show, Sean.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
I want to dig in right there. How did you kind of come up with the idea for EFO Ventures, those kind of industries to start off? What was your investment thesis?
Yeah, so we started. Dave and my partner and I started because we were operators. So as you mentioned, going back 15 years ago, I was the founder and CEO of Gotcha Mobility at a time when mobility wasn't a thing. It definitely wasn't as trendy as it is now, and it was much more how buses and cars moved around cities and universities. So I was very, very early on in the space, almost too early, a lot would say, from an investor and
Mm.
operator standpoint. But as a result, right, I was able to kind of learn and live through a lot of what happened in the industry. And it ended with a 3-year sprint with our last company before selling it. And like a lot of operators, you leave the day-to-day space and you want to decide what to do next. Dave and I knew we wanted to work together, and we wanted to stay in what we call the Moby Tech arena. So we started like a lot of small investors, which is write checks and try to get involved. And that has evolved drastically over the past 2 years from where our original thesis was. But we knew we wanted to stay in the ecosystem, and that was the beginning of EFOV.
And so I'm curious there. Can you mention what types of companies that you're invested in, and kind of what are the kind of key players, and how the industry has evolved over the time that you know you've been involved from your operator days to now?
Yeah, so there's been an evolution. So if you back up into a very short period of time, a very fast evolution. 2 years ago is when we started the firm. The original idea then was we were going to invest in a broader group of things. We really did look at health and wellness, and we looked at mobility, and we looked at sustainability as a standalone. What we realized very quickly is that as an investor, at least we believed, an investor and now an operator, you've got to focus on areas where you can add value, and that's not just financial. So when we started the fund 2 years ago, we made a few of what I'd refer to as kind of traditional or passive investments from a traditional kind of VC standpoint. Those were in electrified vehicles and curb management, two areas that we are pretty passionate about and we are very bullish on. So those two companies, Vulcan and Automotus, are great kind of technology and hardware product companies. And we learned a lot through that. Those are spaces we cared about. We could add some value. But what we really realized is what we enjoy doing, where we could add value, was to create more of a studio model. So EFOV is that today. The 6 companies we've incubated and invested in since then are really one conglomerate, one holding company of mobility tech, Moby Tech companies. And those are both in the US and in Europe. As I mentioned earlier, I'm in Ireland, so I spend a lot of our focus on EFOV kind of looking at Europe. Dave and our team in the US do the same thing for North America. But I think where we're going as a company and as a fund is to create these cohorts or kind of sister companies that could work collectively. And we think that's a model that is, one, unique, and two, could be pretty transformative.
That's an interesting concept. So you hope to get synergy by really hyper focusing in a certain space, and then having, I guess, do you have cross-pollination with the different portfolio companies?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. And I'd love to say that this was all whiteboarded out with some grand strategy session, but it was an evolution of learning as we go, or building the aircraft as you were flying it, like a lot of entrepreneurs would understand. But that's exactly it. Is we know the space, we know where we can add value, and if you look at operators or hardware providers or software companies, and you look at the synergies that those could have to each other, and then the value they can create outside of our enterprise, there's real value from an equity creation standpoint. So we think that you put a group of founders together that are synergistic, they can learn a lot, and the benefits from a fund or a studio like ours is you really get the ability to kind of have all, the tide rise all boats. So we've seen that work over the past year and a half, and think that can continue.
I know you probably look at all the portfolio companies as like your kids and you love them equally, but is there one that really stands out that you say, hey, I'd love to share, hey, here's what we're doing with, X?
Yeah. Well, I have two sons and a daughter at home, so you should have the conversation of how we divvy up love there. My daughter came along last, and the two boys would argue that your theory doesn't hold water. But no, I'm just kidding. I love all my kids equally. They're all
Good
great.
answer. Good answer. Nice save.
Yeah. So I think from a corporate standpoint, every business is at a little different evolution of its kind of life cycle. So similar to children, right? They need different things at different time. Dave, myself, Brett, our other kind of team members within EFOV, all add value at different stages, but we're all builders. So I think if you look at them, we're all kind of motivated and excited at different times in their life cycle. And there's like a new set of challenges that we could jump into. So they've all kind of gone through that emotional cycle of how we focus on them and where we see value. And I think that's okay, right? There are certain ones where in the very beginning, the executive team is in product discovery, beta creation. They're really focused on software or hardware. And then they get past that and they need to bring the thing out into the world and find a customer willing to transact with them. And that's a different phase. And then they get to a point where they're generating revenue, and that's day-to-day operational piece. So they need maybe less love there. But sure enough, the younger child is going to need a lot more attention from the parents. So I think it's probably the value of the model we've created, or one of the values, is that each company needs different things, so we can then divvy it up at different times, and it helps from a bandwidth standpoint.
Understood. I think your approach or your model is quite interesting, right? Because within kind of startup venture capital, there was this phase, you had these like SoftBank Vision Fund where they would just plow in hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'm not sure if they did anything else besides, quote unquote, try to pick the winners, right? And
So,
they just poured in money into an industry or into a company and kind of said, hey, go for it or go nuts or go crazy, right? And there was not much guidance, or at least
yeah.
from my perspective, right? Um, what is the kind of feedback that you're getting from the entrepreneurs, the founders, the CEOs that you're investing in, and even their teams, their technologists? Do they
Yeah.
much appreciate your kind of model, or are they just saying, hey, like all dollars are green, and your dollars have that extra plus plus maybe?
Well, I think it's probably the latter, in that, as a founder myself, you need capital at different stages, and you'll need it forever. But sometimes taking capital, or the wrong capital at the wrong time for the wrong reasons, is what drives your decision making as a founder, as a C-suite. That goes all the way through the organization, and you can feel that, right? The external pressure that capital can put on you to make decisions. isn't always correct, right? Not at all throwing shade at those larger funds who have done a fantastic job of
Sure.
helping to build great companies. But I think what I learned as a founder was sometimes you do have to be a little patient, right? Sometimes product market fit doesn't happen at this exact moment. And by being forced by your investor or partners to make certain decisions, you might miss the next opportunity. So not that we are patient, right? We are capitalists, so we want a return. But part of the value of having these 6 companies in this portfolio today is we do have the ability to wait a little bit longer for the right opportunity with 1 or 2 of those companies, or to be a little bit more patient here, or see the chessboard a little more clearly of what one company's building, because we have real insight into what another operating business who could be a potential customer of that other company, and share that guidance with the executive team. So I think the patience and maybe the approach to the industry is beneficial. And we are hyper focused on, again, what we call Moby Tech. And that landscape is not just about e-scooters running around, Venice. It's significantly bigger, and it's such an ecosystem that we're passionate about, that if you can have that view, I think our portfolio companies value that, that kind of long game approach.
Now, Sean, how is the VC market now? With the change in the Fed, with inflation, high interest rates, you don't have access to cheap capital. And then you're in Europe as well, which it seems like is having as bad or even a worse economic time than we are here in the US. Like, how is it for you?
So I would say on a more global stance, it's maybe challenging. I think we're in a unique position that we are on the smaller side. We funded most of our companies, like a lot of first fund organizations, with a closely knit group, and we had kind of full control over that. That's helped us a lot along the way. I think if you look at the VC market, there's a lot of dry powder out there that was raised pre some of the constraints that you mentioned, Jack. So I think there's a lot of dry powder out there. I think we went through a very aggressive, high valuation, trying to do a lot of deals. Then you look at the market today with the constraints that you mentioned, people are now using that as an opportunity to maybe retrade some of those values and be a little bit more opportunistic. So I think that's a challenge for founders. And I talk to a lot of founders every week. I think the message there needs to be, you've got to do whatever it takes to stay on the bull or stay on the horse, or whatever analogy you want, because while it won't be as fast and you might not be getting as many offers from VCs, that shouldn't discredit the value of the business you're building. You've got to do whatever you can to hunker down and make it through this period of time, because I think there's just going to be a reset to the market. So we're seeing that, we're sharing that with our founders, right? There's companies in our portfolios who are trying to raise outside capital, and they might just need to wait 6 months, and we as partners are going to have to help support them. And I like to think that other larger VCs are taking similar approaches because we need to support these companies in the ecosystem.
Do you have a sense of how long this is going to go on? Not just with your company, but just generally, and then in particular, let's say for the blind, people on the platform who are thinking of, hey, maybe I want to go to one of these startups. I want to, check it out. Is that the right move? Do they wait? How do you think this will be, like 6 months, a year, 2 years till we get back to some sort of normalcy? And I know you don't have a crystal ball, so like this, and I know I'm really not the answer, but do you have any kind of feel like how this is all going to play out?
I wish I did. Look, I wish I had a DeLorean and could take advantage of some of those gems from Back to the Future. But
Right.
I don't really know. I think traditionally you'd look at this like 12 to 18 months from the beginning of the scary R word, and I think you have to do your own research on when that happens. But we went through a very tumultuous, kind of unheard of time with COVID that threw a lot of the traditional markers out the window. So you've got to discount some of that. You look at the unfortunate part of a lot of large companies, especially in the technology space, having to shrink their workforce, anywhere from 5 to 15, 20%, unfortunately, is probably affecting a lot of your listeners. And I think there's some options that happened during that, no different than 2008, 2009. And that is either hunkering down if you worked for a larger tech company to then maybe explore some of these startups. And we've encouraged some of our startups, both that we work with and ones that might not necessarily fit our thesis, but we would like to give advice to. Now look at the workforce that might be now laid off from one of these large tech companies, but maybe they weren't as happy in that environment and they want to get back into the startup ecosystem, can add a ton of value, are at a different place in their career and have maybe seen and rode the wave that ended where they are today. So I think a lot of times there's some connection between great talent and great entrepreneurs in this kind of lull that could lead to some great things, right? It's easier said that 6, 8, 12 months will go by quickly, knowing that there's day-to-day financial pains. But I think the message has to be we've got to push through that period of time with a better outcome to come.
It's so interesting because, Rick, would you think a lot of the folks on the platform, and then others who aren't on the platform but listen to the podcast, they're looking at if this was 6 months ago, a year ago, they were looking at some fat stock options, sitting pretty, looking great, and like, hey, I'm at Microsoft, I'm at Apple, I'm at Amazon, I'm doing really well. Now with the plummet in the stock market and the drop in the value, I wonder if they'll say, you know what, maybe either I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. Let me with a bunch of buddies, and we're software engineers. We know what to do. Let's start something out. Because during recessions, some major companies started, so they could do that, or say, you know what, I'll go, like you said, Sean, from a larger organization and to a startup, maybe get some stock options, get a nice lofty, position, and then hope for the best.
No, I think that's exactly right. Right. So a lot of these big tech engineers, these are our listeners, the blind community, a lot of their compensation was based in stock, right? And now when you're saying it crater, they're asking their companies for top ups. There's kind of this like sense of like let's batter down the hatches, right? But there's also some folks that are kind of startup curious, right? They're saying like, oh, I would never consider startups before because they couldn't match my total compensation at some of these large
Yeah.
companies, and now they're almost the same, right? And so I love to double click in there, right? For those who aren't familiar with kind of how the startup ecosystem, like what are the signals that they should be looking for in terms of fundraising, or who's on their cap table, or who's advising them, like are there kind of pearls of wisdoms that you can share from your vantage point there?
Yeah. So I think, to close out the first one, I'd encourage everybody who's in a situation where they've got time to connect with the ecosystem locally, right? Like grit is typically the thing that most entrepreneurs or people who go work for a startup are lacking. And if you've just gone through this wave of growing with a big company, losing out on your stock options, and then unfortunately being let go, you now see what it's like, and you've probably gotten some new layers to your skin that you didn't have before. So
Right.
probably a perfect time to now enter the ecosystem and work alongside founders. So I'd say from a founder standpoint or founding team members, the people you surround yourself with at any stage of business, but early on, is paramount, right? So that's the partners you choose to bring in as co-founders or employee number 1 through whatever. That is paramount. And it's a time as a founder, a co-founder, where you can help really control it. Right? We've all probably been part of big organizations where You don't get to pick your employee number 153 as closely as you did number 2. And I think building that base is fantastic. And you get to be pretty selective around those folks. And then you mentioned, Rick, the advisory piece. There are so many very talented advisors out there, regardless if they're going to write you a check, who want to help. I think the number one thing founders don't do is ask for it, is say, I've never done this before, or I'm stuck right here. Would you be willing to sit down and have a cup of coffee and chat about my idea, or sit on my advisory board, and meet for 30 minutes every month? There are so many people out there who will gladly say yes because they believe in sharing the knowledge they have, but they don't get the ask. And the entrepreneurs who pick up the phone or send me an email and say, hey, do you have 20 minutes? And I'd love to discuss this, and this. The ones who do that, more often than not, would love to do it. Like, how's Saturday afternoon for you? It's you've got to reach out and ask.
Wow. It's just curious, Rick, Sean, is there any platform that kind of connects, those folks? Like, let's say that, the software engineers, the developers, the salespeople, with startup companies that are, maybe in an embryonic stage and need the help to kind of bridge those experienced people who are saying, hey, I'm going to segue out of big tech and into something more entrepreneurial, like a pipeline.
I don't know if this still exists, but 10 years ago, when I was startup curious and trying to get into the tech industry, my background was in lobbying, so it's just about the kind of furthest away you can get from the tech scene. I heard of, there was a platform, and it was literally called Founders Dating, and it was mostly to get like non-technical founders who had an idea to get an engineer or CTO that would actually go and build it. I'm not sure if it still exists, but there's some like niche communities that are out there that are there to kind of solve that problem.
Yeah, I don't know of one that exists today. I mean, I think the three of us are now the co-founders of the next platform.
I think we're onto something, Sean. Yeah, I know this isn't mobile. How do we make this mobile to make it attractive?
How do we get Sean in on this, right?
All right. So how about we introduce, but you have to be on like an electric bike. Is that maybe we could spin that mobile thing? I think you squeezed it in. To all your listeners on the platform, if you're an engineer to help us build this, get in touch. Yeah. So I will tell you, I have spent a lot more time, like a lot of professionals, on LinkedIn. One, as my career shifted, right? A lot of founders, I left the baby that I helped raise for 14 years at my last company, and you end up with a little more time on your hands in deciding what's next. LinkedIn was a great opportunity for me to reconnect to folks that was a professional connection. I wanted to learn more, and you get that chance. So while not the location to necessarily, get together and build something, the connection points, if used correctly, is pretty phenomenal. So I've encouraged a lot of our founders. We also do a lot of work with universities, so college kids coming out to figure out, what do I do to engage with the professional community through that platform. So I'm a fan for sure.
I kind of want to dig into this theme of exploration, right? So, if I'm going into the startup industry for the first time, I'm looking at these companies that what should I be looking for in terms of kind of, is it a good sign that they keep raising money, or is it a bad sign? Is it, a good sign that they have these huge brand name, venture capitalists that are just known for kind of throwing money and kind of saying, hey, I'm done with you. I did my job, go nuts. How should I kind of consider or navigate that piece? Because recruiters, they love to say that, right? They love to brag about these kind of things.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll say this, because even after this, blip, or however we want to refer to it, happens, if you look at the companies who have had to go in and lay off 15% of their workforce, for example, if you backed up 8-12 months, capital was more available. They were raising because that's how traditionally companies in that space scale. And as part of that, you're going to have to hire people and growth. And the culture that comes out of that is typically this rah, like, oh, we're in it together and we're building this rocket ship. Now, when you hit a blip and you've got to pull back, this is what happens. Now, that doesn't historically to me take away from what they were building, right? If the underlying thing was valuable and wasn't just propped up by VC, which we could all name companies that were,
Sure.
but that doesn't take away from the idea. So I think what I would encourage employees to think about is that, do you believe in the idea and the people building it? And do you want to be part of it? But also, like, not everything is rose-colored glasses. And I, I could say that because I'm an optimist, right? So it's harder for me to say, but I do think you have to go into it knowing and understanding how investments into companies work, what the expectations are, and then what happens when there's an event that slows the market you're going into. So I think everybody who's going through this market right now should do some personal learning around, hey, this could happen 10 years from now, and I'm still going to be in the workforce, and I might want to go work for the fastest growing company in X space. And now you know a little bit, which if you didn't go through 2008, 2009, you might not know. You might not have those lessons. So I think it's a real learning opportunity, both for founders as well as for team members joining organizations.
Got it. No, I appreciate your advice there, right? Because I think it's so easy to kind of get caught up in the news headlines. And I'm saying this as my day job is as a PR person, right? You think news headlines are the most important, but I think people get really focused on the news headlines and they don't realize like they're extremes, right?
Yeah.
It is newsworthy when a company starts off and raises at $1 billion valuation, right? It's also news when a company lays off 5%, 15%. And most people don't see beyond those headlines, and they don't see the operators that don't make the headlines because they're a business that, believe it or not, just works and makes money. Like
Right.
what a
Yeah.
shocker. And so I really appreciate that, right? Because it's really easy to kind of get caught up in that frenzy where the recruiter is saying, oh, like look how fast we're growing, we're raising so much money, your stock options are going to be worth, you know, XYZ at this inflated price or this number that they just made up. Um,
Yeah.
and so I like that kind of first principles approach that you're kind of like just reminding everyone to get grounded, really do your research,
Yeah.
make the best decision. It's almost like when you're working at a startup, uh, it's almost like you're investing, right, in that company, in that idea. Maybe not with your money, but definitely in your kind of talent and certainly time,
Yeah.
right?
I think you are. And look, it's as a founder myself who went through both, and
Yeah.
I built a big business that then hit lulls, and we had to go through very large layoffs. So as a founder, no different than a team member, you've got to take a step back, see what you learned, process that, and then hopefully grow. I know I did, right? I learned a lot from those very challenging times, just as much as when you could do no wrong and you were scaling and taking on money and customers. So that should happen through the entire organization, just as human beings and professionals and how we view our day-to-day lives. So you can never have that if you've only succeeded, which I think there's a very few number of people who haven't had challenging times, but you've got to step back and learn from that. I think it's the only way to really truly grow and be prepared for when it happens next, because history will repeat itself. I think we are all aware.
I mean, can we get a sneak peek? Is there kind of like a common failing or like a common story that you like to tell your founders that you speak to in terms of kind of the lesson that you want to pass on there?
Yeah, so I don't know that there you can predict an exact moment, but what I am very cautionary of is as a business scales, right? You lose sight historically of where you make money and when you make money because traditional equity that comes in for, a VC backed, non-publicly traded company is all about growth. And I think where we sometimes miss a beat is what is growth? Is that headcount and number of offices? Is it
Huh.
dots on a map? And I think the thing that we're probably off from a calibration is um, revenue and a true path to profitability. Not a we ever hear like, oh, we've got line of sight to profitability. Like, well,
Right.
what the heck does that mean? Like you've got 2030, like what's that idea? And if you're not honest with yourself, your employees, the rest of the organization of what that is, this will catch up to you and it will result in you don't have enough revenue to cover your expenses. And the only way to do it is to shrink by X. And that affects people, right? That affects so having a real view of when and where that happens as a founder, executive team, an employee is paramount, right? That you know where those lines intersect.
Sean, you raises an interesting point that I'm always wrestling with. So, um, I've written for Forbes, profiling a large number of these startup companies. A lot of them founded by like guys who are like 12 years old, and now there's a billion,
Sure.
multi-billion dollar unicorn company,
Yeah.
and there's very little revenue, definitely no profits, burning through, money like crazy. And like watching everything else, I'm like, I don't understand it. I imagine a lot of people don't say like, how long can you do these companies keep doing that where you're just you have a great office. Well, now a lot of people are remote, but you have nice
Yeah.
offices, you have all the amenities, you have all the perks, all that kind of stuff. But like you're not really making money, like you're saying. And there's so many of them. I mean, does it eventually it catches up, or do they have to be acquired, or they fall apart, or they close? Like, especially in this environment, which is not very hospitable,
Yeah.
towards folks who aren't making money, don't have money in the bank, and didn't keep, and kind of maybe blew through all the rounds of funding.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll tell you from the sector that I understand and am more passionate about, right? So if you look at the Moby Tech space, and
Right.
if you look at what most consumers think of, right? E-bikes, e-scooters, consumer facing. So if you believe, like I do, that we are not all going to drive gas powered massive vehicles in our communities where our average trip is under 5 miles going forward, then the sector is here to stay. Does that mean that the scooter company that started 5 years ago and raised, $800 million at a $2.5 billion value, that those 5 years were wasted? No. Does it mean that they had to wait until they had the right model, the right pull from the market, and all those pieces in place to be profitable? Yes. I think what happens during that period of time is you have a lot of roadkill, unfortunately, in the way as you were building that. And that's a lot of times the investment thesis is you've got to back enough people to see who comes out the other end. Where I think the value is not necessarily in those people who are first or raise the most money, but the ones now who understand the market, see a product market fit, and are solving a problem. So I think it's got to be the underlining. Do you think the new space is transformative and has, you know, a future that's not just a blip in time? Everybody probably remembers the Groupons of the world, where that moment in time was, I don't want to pay full price for dinner, right? It was 2008, 2009, 2010, like great market fit. Would we have thought past that period of time when the market picked back up again? Would we want a discount? Sure. Would we go out of our way to get one and only go on a Wednesday? Probably not, when we were happy again with our salaries. So sometimes it's just what's the underlining like lifestyle and change that is going to have a global effect. And so I try to take that view. Like, will I change? Will this change the way I live for years in the future? Will my kids only ride a light electric vehicle, and will they most likely share it? I believe they will. I don't think my daughter is going to get her driver's license at 16, get a gas powered car and leave it parked in a parking space for 23 hours a day. I don't think that's her future. So I'm investing in the fact that I believe that to be true.
What do you think of e-bikes? Because I love riding my bike. I'm not crazy. I'm not a marathon rider kind of guy, but I love getting out there and doing it. And I'm very curious about e-bikes. Like, is that one of your, that's part of your portfolio, right? That's part what you do.
Yeah.
And how is it? Have you tried it? Is it cool? Is it good?
You are my guy, Jack. E-bikes. I think this is another one of those transformative moments, right? Bikes have been. My dad was born and raised in Ireland. Rode a bicycle from his farmhouse to school every day. So bikes have been around forever. People will always kind of go back to that. I think what happens when e-bikes were introduced and that technology is that it finally opened it up to people who viewed that as an enjoyable mode of transportation. Like, yes, there's exercise, yes, there's social, but now I don't have to be a spandex clad, Tour de France rider in order to ride a bike. I don't have to show up at work sweaty. Like, I can now use it differently, and that's transformative. I don't think we go back the other way. So I think the opportunity is massive. We are very heavily invested into both e-bike manufacturers, different business models, whether it's subscription or direct to consumer. I ride one here. I ride one of our products mixed every day, both from a exercise and a transportation standpoint. And I think I'm in pretty good shape, but I couldn't ride 40 miles on a pedal bike. I can ride 40 miles on my electric.
That's it, Sean. All right, this is a stupid question. Like, how does it work? Like, do you just flip on? You're riding like a regular bike, but then you just flip something on, and then it goes into electric mode, and now it's easier. How does it go?
So there's a few different kinds. Without nerding out, there is
nerd out, because I'm really curious about it. I think a lot of people are curious, because I don't wear. By the way, I don't wear spandex, or I don't even wear a helmet. And my wife and kids get really mad at me, but maybe I should. But I love riding a bike, but I hate. You know what? I can't stand when the wind blows in my face when I'm riding, because yeah, I know I'm exercising, but at the same time, man, it's annoying. So that's why I'm really excited about learning more about e-bikes.
So there's class 1, class 2.
Okay.
The difference is a class 1 is a bike that you still have to pedal. They're limited to 20 miles an hour from a top speed. And the motor and the technology that's in the bike, depending on what it is helping you as you pedal. So that hill that you would struggle with as you're pedaling, a really solid e-bike gives you the boost to help you get up it, but you still have to actively use it. A class 2 e-bike, you'd see a lot of delivery drivers using it where you could pedal, but you really are putting the throttle down, and it's not an active mode of transportation. It's not a motorcycle, but it's also not a pedal bike. So we focus today in that class 1. We believe in active transportation. So the idea that there's a little bit of an energy and like a little bit of a human powered element to it. I think that's the future. While there's still plenty of those non-active throttle opportunities out there. So that's the real difference. I do think you should wear a helmet because I want you to arrive safely. Now you've got to go out there and find one that looks cool. We won't get into the vanity of it, but I do think you should wear one. But I think it's transformative. I think that everybody's going to find the right product that fits them, and I think we're at the beginning of it, but the scales have shifted toward more electric ownership.
What do you have to pay for them, generally speaking?
So you can, what's also helpful now with adoption is, like anything that's now starting to become more mainstream, is now you have options, which where it becomes helpful. So when e-bikes just a few years ago were $5,000 to $10,000, very small portion of the population can and should do that. So then some groups came out with very inexpensive, and now they're leveling out. You could go to a retailer and buy a sub-$1,000 e-bike. That would be good, not great, but a great way to get in there and enter the market. And then, like anything, right? My first car was awful, and I got better and better as I could afford to do. Like, we're finally in that with electric bikes, and the consumers can enter and grow with the market based on where they are from a lifestyle standpoint. So you can spend under 1,000, and you can still spend 10,000 plus for a spaceship.
So I want to dig a bit into Mobitech, right? So it's not just the scooters, the shares. There's a lot I've heard with like sensor technology, right? Almost this like telematics in terms of how we're actually going to build and design cities and airports and logistics, just all the space around us that we're going around on. Do you kind of have an opinion on where that's going in terms of kind of whether that's smart cities or just like management technology or
Yeah.
fleet management? Like, can you kind of give us some insights there?
Yeah, I think this is where the exciting part comes. Like, so no different than any industry when fintech became into its own. It wasn't just banking, but it was the ecosystem around it. And I think that's where we are with mobility, and now what we've kind of coined Mobitech is there's, yes, the hardware. There's the things the three of us would see as consumers that we would buy or share in the street. But then there's all the peripherals. So that could be the infrastructure that's then going to be needed to charge all of this device. There's going to be the battery technology and the things way before a battery ends up in our device in that supply chain. There's the software that allows us to interact with the ecosystem. And then, to your point, there's all the sensors. We incubated a company called Hello Llama, which is the ADAS, the advanced safety that you'd have in a car.
Wow.
This team has unbelievable group of engineers. They have designed all of the sensors for light electric vehicles that will start to tell you how you can interact from an active safety standpoint with your surroundings. So dual rider and helmet and lane detection. So you start to look at all of the things that exist in the ecosystem, and it's just unbelievably exciting. Because as mass adoption, it's a $300 billion industry today. When that happens, entrepreneurs and engineers and so much talent starts attacking that space, and that's when innovation really comes.
So within Mobitech, do you find that there's are you more excited about this kind of infrastructure ecosystem kind of play versus the more like consumer, like very easy to understand, like, hey, it's a shared bike, or hey, it's a scooter or something?
Yeah. So I think you have to separate. What I do is I separate the
Okay.
sexy, which is like a friend who you run into saying, "Oh, I just bought an e-bike." You're like, "Great." That means it's working. From a investor and incubator of businesses, that
Sure.
means you need all the other stuff, right? Like, how do you insure it? How do you charge it?
Uh,
So the opportunity really exists, I think, larger behind the curtain, behind the things that like my mom sees. My mom's like, "Oh, I saw e-bikes everywhere." I'm like, "That's fantastic." Now, what I'm excited about at EFOV and others is all the peripheral that is how you stand up an industry. I mean, you look at the auto industry, right? Most people see car dealerships on every street. And then if you are a little behind the curtain, you see manufacturing. But then you start to see where they assemble wire harnesses and batteries come from, and all of those, tentacles of it. that industry is going to be much bigger than what we see as consumers.
So perhaps, if I am a technologist like looking to move, like it's the unsexy companies, right? The companies that, maybe I should be excited that, a recruiter reaches out and I haven't heard of the company.
I think so. And I think if you could, if you're a technology person and your skills are to build things, I think the things that people don't see are massive companies today. If you look at other sectors that most consumers won't see, and I think there's real opportunity there, both from entrepreneurs and employees, team members looking to join them. I think it's always attractive to go to the one that everybody sees on every corner, or you can buy in a store, have all of those pieces. I think there's real opportunity to build the backbone of the Moby Tech sector.
Got it. Wow. I know that you are invested in some of these like backbone infrastructure companies. Do you plan to kind of further your investments there going forward? Do you see that it's more trendy, in Europe versus or Asia versus the US? Like, can you kind of give us the scoop there?
Yeah, so I think the easy answer is yes. We're going to continue
Okay.
to invest and incubate in both. I think there's going to be even more opportunity with the behind the scenes aspects of it. So I'd say that our thesis will probably lean more toward the companies and the parts of the industry that we don't see as consumers.
Okay.
We get a really unique view that half of our business is in Europe and the other is in the U.S. And there's lessons to be learned by both. So I think we're going to take that into our investment thesis and kind of see where products and companies are in their life cycle. But I think the amount of kind of blue sky available for this space is very, very large. And I think we're just at the beginning of that tipping point. So
Hmm.
I think it's the perfect time. Look, if I was an engineer and looking to get into the space and I had personal interest and curiosity to it, I would say there's years, decades of building a career in the space. So it's a great time to get involved and maybe not pay attention as much to maybe some of the publicly traded companies who have had to shrink or they're not profitable yet. That should not be the barometer for, is it an industry that has legs? Again, the barometer should be, do we think people are going to ride stuff like this in the future?
Got it. I wonder, are there any other kind of geographic trends that you see versus, on the Europe side versus the US side? Is one market kind of edging towards one direction or the other in terms of Moby Tech or really the kind of startup VC space?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is I get to say this because I'm an American and an Irish citizen.
Right.
Is the biggest difference is Europeans weren't immediately in love with the vehicle, the car, the single occupancy car in particular, as their primary mode of transportation, right? So public transportation was higher utilized. The idea of
Sure.
biking or walking was higher adoption rates. The US, we love our automobile. And look, I do too. I think there are plenty of use cases to be in a vehicle for longer trips. But I think the shift now with electrification is universal. So the same things that are happening in the US by state with pushing toward electrification by 2030, 2035 and beyond is happening here. I think there's a lot more, probably faster adoption in Europe to that mindset. But the trend and the challenge is going to be the infrastructure required to do that. Where do all the batteries come from, and how do we charge them from a infrastructure standpoint? And how do we dispose of those batteries after they've been used? Which I think is a huge opportunity for the folks on your platform, right? You look at the electrification of things, and I don't begin to understand the engineering behind it, but there's a lot of very smart people out there who I think will see that ecosystem and their brains can connect how to solve any one of those, right? What do we do about our grid? And what do you do about production and shipping and disposal? Like the number of opportunities for a technologist are mind blowing.
Do you think it also makes sense? This is for the folks, let's say, on blind who might say, huh, I'm looking for something different. Portugal, other countries are really trying to bring in digital nomads. And given the uncertainty, given all the craziness here in the US, maybe that's not such a bad idea for somebody to say, hey, you know what, let me kind of seek out opportunities based in Europe or Asia. I mean, what do you think? Is that viable? Is that an outlet for people?
I think I would encourage everybody to explore if they can, right? Like if their personal situation, whether that's financial or family, allows them to explore, I would encourage it. My wife, myself, our 3 kids, we moved to Ireland during the pandemic, and it was great. I spend a lot of time still back in the US, but to be able to get a different perspective, to be able to engage with different communities, from a work standpoint, to be able to engage with different companies, I think is great. And the same can be said for folks in Europe, Asia, and elsewhere looking to North America, right? I think the opportunity now that if you are able to travel and the legality of doing it, the ability to kind of share skill sets with other companies and work remote is second to none. I think the opportunity we have to do that is very unique, and I think COVID provided of all of the atrocious things it did. That remoteness is I think a positive. So I would encourage it.
Interesting. Are there any kind of like, is there kind of like any like last minute like lesson or kind of thing advice that you want to share with our audience there?
Yeah, I think kind of like we've talked about, there is a very unique moment in time that will repeat itself again. But I think we all should focus on where those opportunities are, where we are kind of personally and professionally, and where we could add value to the market. And I think the folks who do that, the folks who look internally and then look externally at the opportunities and take their skill sets and push them forward and find ways to partner, that 2022, 2023 will be viewed as transformative years. I think the folks who do not do that will not enjoy them as much and have maybe more challenging times, right? So
Right.
I I think we get the opportunity to a little bit choose how we're gonna get out of bed and spend our 24 hours a day. And I'd encourage folks to view it, while a challenge, as a very, very big opportunity, whether that's my industry or others. I think there's so much talent and so much opportunity out there. And my dad used to always say, when I went through very tough times, I lost everything I had during the 2008, 2009 real estate business. Like, time really does cure everything. Like, you got to get up and you got to go to do what you do for another 24 hours. And like, you've just got to see every day through. And like most things, my dad was right. And I think that's how I view this time.
Awesome. No, thanks for the advice. I truly appreciate kind of the insider's perspective in terms of Moby Tech. I love the advice in terms of how to consider startups as, you know, almost like you're investing, right? When you're investing your time and it's a great opportunity even now when there's some uncertainty in terms of like the economics, in terms of the world at large. So thanks so much for coming on the show, Sean.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thanks.
I enjoyed the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean.